attempted to go down the tariffs in order to manipulate the world economy into bringing manufacturing back to the United States, and all the theories and ideas that are going behind it. I'm going to go back into an essay that was written hundreds of years ago and break down a section of it that talks about this very thing. And if you can recognize a lot of the underlying economic forces that are taking place, especially the ones that are shown here in Cantillon essay on economic theory, by following some of the things that Cantillon was describing back in the day, you can begin to recognize these economic forces. So I'm going to break down a section of this essay. And now this is chapter, let me get to the beginning. This is chapter 1 of section 3, right? So this is part 3, chapter 1. Let me just make sure that's chapter 3. Yeah, chapter 3, International Trade and Business Cycle. This is chapter 1, foreign trade. This is a great, excellent chapter. This whole essay is really good. There's a link down in the description to an Amazon affiliate link where you can go buy the essay off of Amazon. I get a little tiny commission off of that, but you do not have to buy this essay off of Amazon. You can go get it for free at the Mises Institute, right? Cantillon essay on eco. Oh, I guess the camera's flipped because the YouTube app likes to flip my camera around. All right, but it's Cantillon essay on economic theory. Again, there's a link down in the description. Okay, let's start breaking down some of this essay because it's really good. It's very telling of what it is that we are facing now. Of course, back in the day, this is Cantillon hundreds of years ago. We got, he's talking horses and wagons. We got airplanes and cell phones. So very different type of economy, but again, the underlying economic forces, I believe, can be recognized. So I'm just going to break down some of this speech now here. Okay, it says like this. Infinite inductions could be added to justify these ideas of foreign trade and advantages of abundant money. The disproportion of money in circulation in England and in China is astonishing. Despite an 18-month sea voyage, goods from the Indies, like silks, colored calicos, colored muslins, and etc. I don't know what these things are, but sell for very low price in England and could be paid for with the 13th part of her articles and goods, if the Indians would buy them. But they are not so foolish as to pay extravagant prices for our products, while work is done better and infinitely cheaper in their own country. Now, doesn't this sound familiar, right? I mean, here it is that England is buying articles from the Indies. The Indies said, well, we could be buying articles from them, but we produce it way cheaper. Why would we even try to buy it from you? You guys charge way too much for your stuff, right? So they sell us their goods only for cash money, which we annually carry to them, increasing their wealth and diminishing our own. Indian goods consumed in Europe only reduce our money and work done by our own manufacturers. Okay, so again, we're breaking down Cantillon's essay here, and this is again written hundreds of years ago, but you can kind of see by the first part of this that I'm reading. Again, this isn't the very beginning of the chapter, it's about halfway through the chapter itself. But you can see by that one paragraph that I just read from, you can understand that the manufacturing that we do, right, here in the United States is too expensive for the foreign buyers. And this is what Cantillon was describing back in the day. Now, however, we buy a lot of the production of the foreign buyers, just like England did back in the day buying from the Indies. See how the similarities are just almost the same, right? Now, this isn't uncommon. This is pretty typical for foreign trade and how, history works. A Native American who sells beaver skins to Europe is surprised, and rightly so, to learn that woolen hats are as good as those made of beaver, and that all the difference, which causes so long a sea journey, is in the mind of those who think that the beaver hats are lighter and more pleasant to the eye and the touch. You see, like there's no difference, right? This is what Cantillon is saying, is that really the woolen hat is essentially the same, no difference in the beaver skin hat, but yet the eye of the beholder, right? The one who's looking at it says, well, this is a finer hat and it feels better and therefore it looks better and it's a better hat, even though it's essentially the same thing, right? However, as these beaver skins are ordinarily paid for to the American in articles of iron and steel, etc., and not in money, this trade is not injurious to Europe, especially since it supports its workers it supports its workers and particularly sailors who are very useful in the state, while the commerce of goods from the East Indies exports money and diminishes the number of workers in Europe. So as he is saying there, is like when they do this trade, like for example with these beaver skins, and they do this trade with the Native Americans didn't really want money. They wanted the stuff, right? They wanted things that they could use. So they were getting articles of iron and steel, which is what they would really want, in exchange for these beaver skins. And so it didn't diminish the European state. They were like able to continue to manufacture and export their manufactured products to the Native Americans essentially in exchange for these beaver skins. But when they did it to the Indies, it didn't work out so well, right? They were exporting money, but not really getting anything in return. I mean, except for the stuff. They weren't getting like a return in trade, like in exchange for their production. It must be acknowledged that the East India trade is profitable to the Dutch Republic and that she makes the loss fall on the rest of Europe by selling its spices and goods in Germany, Italy, Spain, and the New World for a profit well beyond the amount she sends to the Indies. Right? So again, like they bring in and sell more to these other places than they're spending. Holland even finds it useful to clothe her women and other inhabitants with Indian fabrics rather than the English or French fabrics. It suits the Dutch better to enrich the Indians rather than their neighbors, who would use it to oppress them. Moreover, they sell the clothes and small manufactured goods that they produce to other Europeans for more than what they pay for the Indian goods consumed in Holland. So even just by in that sense, they just simply just like, well, they'll just not buy it from these people and buy it from them. Not only is it cheaper, but then we're not enriching the neighbors who would probably then end up not buying the product, the particles of, or the other items from us. All right. It goes on. And this is pretty good. I know this is boring, guys, but in order to understand this stuff, you really have to break it down, right? You have to really understand it from the old days to then recognize some of the things that are some of the issues we're facing today. England and France would be mistaken to imitate the Dutch in this respect. These kingdoms have the means to clothe their women with their own products and through their fabrics, and more, even though the fabrics are more expensive than the Indian-made ones, they should prevent their people from wearing the foreign fabrics. They ought to prevent the reduction of their own articles and goods and not become dependent on foreigners. Still less allow their money to be taken away for that purpose. See, he recognizes it right then. He was like, they should do this. They should not buy the cheaper Indian products so long as they are making it for themselves and continue to buy their own product. This is essentially what we would want to be doing here in the United States today, or at least try to get back to, but like the idea of that is kind of not realistic. Anyway, continuing on here. But as the Dutch find means to sell Indian goods in other states of Europe, English and French should do the same, whether to reduce Holland's naval power or to increase their own, and above all, to do without Holland's aid in the branches of consumption that a bad habit has been made necessary in these kingdoms, right? So they just all become reliant on Holland, and they say to increase their own, but to not rely anything on Holland, right? Because Holland was like, the East Indian shipping company or whatever, trading company, and they kind of basically just ruled everything. All right. It is visible disadvantage to allow the wearing of Indian fabrics in the kingdoms of Europe that have the means to clothe their people with their own products. Basically saying it's disadvantage if you're buying it from somebody else, you should continue on your own. Just as it is disadvantage for the state to encourage foreign manufacturers, so it also encourage foreign navigation. When a state sends its articles and goods abroad, it could obtain the full advantage of it if it obtain the full advantage if it sends them with its own ships. This way, trade supports a large number of sailors who are useful to the state as workers. If it leaves ocean transportation to foreign vessels, it strengthens the foreign navies and weakens its own. So, like he was even talking to, it's critical just on the shipping alone. Like to make sure that even if it's your production, to ship it with your ships, because if you're using somebody else's ships, you're just sending money over to these other nations. Essentially, that's what the Dutch did, right? Okay, navigation is essential aspect of foreign trade. In all of Europe, the Dutch are those who build ships the cheapest, right? And that's why they ended up doing it, is because they could build the ships the cheapest. In addition to the rivers that they use to float timber downstream, their proximity to the north supplies them with less expensive mast, wood, pitch, rope, etc. Their mills for sawing wood facilitate the production. In addition, they navigate with smaller crews and their sailors live very cheaply. One of their windmills for sawing wood saves the labor of 80 men a day. So yeah, like, when it comes to shipbuilding, like there's nobody's going to do it better. Not only do they live the cheapest, they sail with the least amount of people, they build those ships the fastest. Like, I mean, it's just like there's no way of competing against them. They got it, right? It was no wonder why they ruled. All right. With these advantages, they would be the only sea carriers in Europe if cost alone mattered, and if they had enough resources to develop an extensive commerce. They would doubtless have the most flourishing merchant marine in Europe. However, their large number of sailors is not sufficient to make them a superior naval power because their state lacks internal strength. Even if they had the large revenues necessary to build a man of war vessels, okay, they would not do so because they profit from the expansion of trade. Like, yeah, even if they want, like, they could build warships, right? Like, this is like they could, and like, hey, we can just, like, have these warships that are badass and just blow everybody up. But that wouldn't work out very well since they do it from the expansion of trade and move it, right? So, like, they got to be friends, they got to be partners, and at the same time, everybody else is trying to compete against them. In order to prevent the Dutch, with their low-cost advantage from expanding their shipping business, England has forbidden any nation from importing goods that it did not produce. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Someone? All right. This precludes the Dutch from shipping to England and thereby strengthens the English shipping business. The English do ship at a greater cost than the Dutch, but the wealth of their overseas cargoes offsets some of these costs. France and Spain are maritime states that have a large part of their products sent to the north. France and Spain are maritime states that have a large part of their production sent to the north, from which they also acquire goods and merchandise. It is not surprising that their navies are insignificant in proportion to their production. Like, they don't even have the capabilities of doing it, even though they're a maritime state, right? Okay, it is not surprising that their navies are insignificant in proportion to their production and the extent of their cost, since they leave it to the foreign vessels to import all goods they receive from the north and to export all goods they send to the northern states. So essentially just relying on foreign transportation. All right, these states, France and Spain, do not take advantageous trade considerations into account in their policies. Most merchants in France and Spain who deal in foreign trade are usually the agents or clerks of foreign merchants and are not entrepreneurs carrying on trade with their own funds. So they're just basically just working the deal. They're the middlemen, right? It is true that the northern states, by their location and proximity to countries that produce all that is needed for shipbuilding, are in possession to transport everything cheaper than France and Spain. However, this should not prevent these two kingdoms from taking steps to strengthen their shipping. England has long shown them examples. They have at home and in their colonies all that is needed for the construction of ships, and and it would not be difficult to get ships built there. There are a variety of methods that could be used to make such a policy successful if legislature or state departments would work towards that goal. My subject does not allow me in this essay to examine these methods in detail. What I find interesting about that is Cantillon is just like, well, here, you could force a situation by using essentially politics, right? You can use the legislator and a government rule to create a situation in which that you can build ships. Absolutely, you could do that, but you notice the Dutch just almost do it naturally. Like they got a mill over there that they know how to put together and engineer that thing together, and they have that thing working that of 80 men. Okay? See, the most industrious people are the ones who win. You can make them like, here, go build ships. Hear me show you how. Let's make this all happen. Invest a lot of time and effort and energy and money into it. But then there's a whole group of people up there who are like, oh, we're pretty good at it naturally, right? We just figured this thing out. And we're industrious when it comes to shipbuilding and having windmills and sawing up timber and stuff like that. See how the difference is? Like people say, oh, no, politics rules. And it's just like, not really, right? Industriousness of the people rule. And it's almost like, evident there. As like Cantillon was saying, hey, they could do this, right? They could go and force this situation. Where was I? Okay. I will simply say that in countries where trade does not support a large number of ships and sailors, it is almost impossible for the prince to maintain a flourishing navy without running the state treasury with large expenditures. Right? So back in the day, shipbuilding was everything. I will conclude by pointing out that the most important form of trade for the increase or decrease of the state's power is foreign trade. The domestic trade is not equally important politically. Interesting. Foreign trade is only half-heartedly supported when attention is not paid to increasing and maintaining large merchants who are natives of the country, ships, sailors, workers, manufacturers. Above all, a balance of trade must be maintained against foreigners. Okay? And that's the whole point, is that we don't really sit in a situation in which that we are producing for ourselves. Right? We consume that of the world. And luckily for us, the world accepts empty paper promises of US dollars. Now, we do have to pay into the future, right? The debt that is owed, but to understand that back in the day, there would have come a moment in which that the gold accumulation would have set something into motion that most people are not willing to experience and not wanting to experience, and that is the redistribution of wealth when the gold goes back out to the rest of the world. I want to read this part to you right here. This is still from the same chapter, but it's a little bit earlier in that chapter. And again, this is for those who have joined in on us. We are reading from Cantillon's essay on economic theory. This is part 3 of the essay, chapter 1, talking about foreign trade. And now this is very familiar to the increase and decrease of money to the state, which is very important chapters. Those of you who are picking up the essay for the first time, read the entire thing. It's really good. Chapters in part 2 of the essay, chapter 6, 7, and 8, the increase and decrease of money to the state, excellent, right? Absolutely excellent. But this little section is very similar to that. And it just kind of broken down. Anyway, here we go. It is true that the continued increase of money will, in time and by its abundance, cause land and labor costs to rise in the state, right? So the more money you get, inflation. All right, so products and manufactured goods will, in the long run, cost so much that the foreigner will gradually cease to buy them. See, the United States used to be a manufacturing powerhouse. We used to sell the world's greatest products to the world. The world sent us their money. This is exactly what Cantillon was describing right here, right? Products and manufactured goods will, in the long run, cost so much that foreigners will gradually cease to buy them. That's what we experienced by the 70s. Our stuff was too expensive, and they were making it for themselves. And will adjust to buying them cheaper elsewhere. By imperceptible degrees, this will ruin the business and manufacturers of the state. So again, like, we can blame everything in the world on politics all you want, but right here, he just described what's happening. When you have an increase of manufacturing, distributing that manufacturing out there to the world is sending you their money, and the products within your nation become more expensive for them to buy. They will then buy it from somebody else. And this will again start to ruin the business and manufacturers of the domestic state. Exactly like what the United States. They said, oh, greed and manipulation. No, it was a higher standard of living and an expensive production. This same cause, right, the abundance of money, will raise the rents of property owners and will put them into the bad habit of importing more articles from foreign countries where they can be purchased for less. See, now as the expensive products that we're making become expensive and those foreigners are now starting to produce it at a cheaper price, now the people who are wanting those items are buying it from foreign producers. Right? Another double whammy taking place here. These are natural consequences. The wealth acquired by a state through trade, labor, and the economy will gradually plunge into luxuries. Bang, right there. How many times have I said it? It's your luxurious life that is the problem. Once you raise your standard of living, everything becomes very expensive. Right? These are the natural consequences of the abundance of money, is people like enjoying the new money. Right? Why wouldn't you? If you got a raise and you got new money, you got a significant raise and a bonus to go with your raise, and you got this new money, wouldn't you want a new car? Wouldn't you want to take a vacation? Right? That's the dive into luxuries. This is exactly what he is describing here. Right? The natural consequences, the wealth acquired by the state through trade, labor, and economy will gradually plunge into luxury. Every time. States that rise by trade do not fail to sink afterwards. This is why I keep saying that the failure is inevitable. He just said it right there. States that rise by trade do not fail to sink afterwards. They always sink afterwards. Because once the new money turns off, everybody falls into poverty. There are steps that might be, but are not, taken to stop this decline. It's not a decline in manufacturing of quality stuff. It's the rise into luxury that is creating the decline, right? There are steps that can be taken. What does that look like? It looks like the boot on the face of humanity. That's what that looks like. He doesn't describe it here, but that's what it is. Don't move into luxuries. How do you prevent people from moving into luxuries? How do you take control of the manufacturing of the state? Right? Boot on the face of humanity. This is exactly what Cantillon would say. There are steps that might be, but are not taken to stop this decline. That's it. But it is always true that when the state has a positive balance of trade and an abundance of money, right? See, now this is what I love about this, right? It is always true that when a state has a positive balance of trade, you're bringing in all the money, right? You're bringing it all in, and you have abundance of money. It seems powerful. And it really is, as long as this abundance continues. That's the problem. Right? Think about that for just a second. So long as the abundance continues, we have to create we have to manufacture a consumer here to bring the abundance in, or else the whole thing starts to fall apart. Okay? It's the dive into luxuries that created the issue, and there is no reversal of it. You can't go back. Going back is painful experience that nobody wants to go through. He describes it time and time again in this essay. The increase and decrease of money to the state, but again, here in foreign trade, where he literally talks about how it is that manufacturers who built the greatest stuff in the world, we built wonderful things for everybody to enjoy. We made their lives better by building these wonderful things and sending it out there to the world. The world sent us their money. The natural consequence from that is that we deprive the world of gold. We then force them into using something of a paper product like the dollar. We could have relinquished the gold. We could have said, okay, well, I guess it's your turn. Here you go. Who's the most industrious out there? And we will fall into poverty and misery, because that's the natural consequence. The wealth acquired by the state through the trade, labor, and economy will gradually plunge into luxury. And if you end the abundance, everybody falls into pain and misery. So as we think about what it is that has happened here in the United States, what it is that we hear with all this idea of trade and all this, I'm thinking if we do not continue the abundance, we fall into decline. Right? I'm not one into, I don't like this. I am not one who says, man, this is the way we got to do it. We all got to be living life of luxuries and abundance. I'm not saying that at all, man. I don't like that. I don't buy new cars. I don't even have new stuff, right? Like all my stuff, you can fit in my Suburban. You can probably fit in this Explorer, this 99 Explorer, because I don't buy new cars. I have a 99 Explorer, 97 Suburban, a 2001 S10. These are my vehicles because I understand what's going on inside of this essay. When you move into luxuries, you are going to set yourself up for decline. And this is exactly what has happened here in the United States. There is no reversal of it. You think about it. How do you become a manufacturing powerhouse again when there's some dude out there sleeping on the ground willing to do your job? He's going to manufacture the same thing that you're going to manufacture, and he's sleeping on the ground, and he eats for pennies for just a handful a day. Eats hardly anything. Works cheaply. Doesn't have anything, right? See, this is the problem that we now face. How do you compete against that? You can't, right? And we require the debt issuance. This is how we bring abundance of money in, is through debt issuance. And it's sad to say that. The only way that this can continue and operate in a way that people are going to be like, hey man, I'm at least enjoying my life and have something to eat, is to continue on with the issuance of debt and the abundance of money and the separation between the rich and the poor for ever increasing amounts of inequality. That's the only way to keep this going. Otherwise, we face the penalties of pain and misery as the abundance turns off and the new money turns off and everybody starts losing the wonderful products that are made around the world that we essentially buy for nothing. Right? I mean, it's not nothing, right? But, I mean, really it is. I mean, if you're buying it with dollars, and dollars are really not backed by anything but an empty paper promise, you're essentially sending them nothing, and they're sending you something for real. I mean, it's wow. Hey, can you delete Costco? Can you just go ahead and ban them off the channel or whatever? Can you make a positive video someday? I do, Todd. This is a positive video, bro. Like, I don't understand why you don't take this and give it meaning as a positive video, that you now understand why it is that things are going down the way they are so you can position yourself accordingly for the situation. This is a positive video, man. Don't take it as a negative. It's not a negative. It's a positive. The meaning is upon you. It's not me. Right? I can't give it meaning like that. Only you can give it meaning like that. I can make it as negative as possible, and you would still receive it in a positive fashion if you wanted to and gave it that meaning. It's up to you, man. That's not on me. I'm sorry, bro. Like, I'm not apologizing for what I'm saying. I'm apologizing for the fact that I can't give you meaning. That's what I'm apologizing for. Let me cruise down here to the bottom. Who announces the recession? I don't know. He's not clever at all. Let's see here. Wait, what was Costco doing? Okay, the Fed. Cody, I will send it to you in email or something like that, but I'm not going to repeat what he was up to. All right. All right. Hold the line, Simon. Your message is outstanding. Yeah, well, thank you, Greg. I appreciate it. I spend a lot of time researching this stuff, breaking it down to try and understand what it is that has been happening throughout history. If you can recognize some of these underlying economic forces, and I get it, man. This is hundreds of years old, right? It's not the same thing that's taken place, but think about some of the underlying economic forces, right? How it is that a manufacturing state becomes a powerhouse by having the best Navy, by having the best manufacturers, by importing all the gold. You raise your standard of living. You move into a life of luxury. This is the stuff that Cantillon was talking about. He didn't recognize what the United States was going to do. I mean, it was hundreds of years before he was, after he died, And so it's like, he didn't know what was going to happen into the future. He just knew that there was economic forces that play out time and time and time again. And we can see it. We can see it happening now. And the problem that I think a lot of times we see or face is that it is an incredibly slow grind. I mean, this is a slow grind. And if it's that, like, very, like, kind of just slow, steady, consistent, you don't notice it that much. Like, you don't notice the change. You just look back and you say, well, 20 years ago it was this way, and so obviously politics had something to do with it, right? Because it was such a slow transition that is moving that people just don't really understand that it was the elevated lifestyle, that it was the luxurious experience that we were having at the time that gave us that ability to have that, like, American dream, have the highest standard of living, have that, all that wonderfulness. It was literally like a blip in time, just a moment, and that can't be returned to. Like, you can't bring that back. It's like anything out there. It's like it's all good things come to an end. All right. Yui, what are your thoughts on CBDC and collateralized loan obligation? Thanks. Yeah, the Bullet Traders, thank you for the questions on there. I've actually talked a little bit about the collateralized loan obligations. I've done a few videos, actually a couple years ago, talking about them. We recently did another one. There was a pretty good TikTok video. A young lady had basically kind of broken down what these private equity groups were doing to, some of the oddest things like hospitals and all kinds of stuff. I had covered that, like, back, like, in SeaWorld. I think it was like a few years ago. I had done a video kind of covering that type of event that was happening with private equity taking over certain companies or certain businesses out there and then essentially shutting them down. Now, the CLOs were kind of played into this because really what ends up happening is, like, it's not the same thing. Like, the private equity group is kind of a different thing and the CLO problem, but they overlap in a certain fashion, right? And then this is where, like, the big controversy starts to happen. The CLO issue, within itself, I think is a pretty big deal. So for, like, people to understand what's going on with the CLO, the collateralized loan obligations, is that there's companies out there that are so bad that they can't even sell their junk bonds, right? Nobody will even buy it. Like, they're worse than a junk bond issuer. And so they have to get loans from a bank, like almost like a traditional loan, like, let me borrow some money, right? So these banks will loan them money. Now, the bank doesn't really want to loan that business money, but they do want to create the debt instrument, the actual loan itself. Because if they can create that debt instrument, the loan, like they sign the bottom line and create this loan, they can sell that loan off to somebody who's going to package it up into something called the collateralized loan obligations. So it goes into a box with a whole bunch of other business loans. And this then is built into what essentially could be looked at like a stack of champagne glasses. They make a pyramid of champagne glasses and they fill the top champagne glass and it starts dripping into all the rest of the champagne glasses. And it's kind of like, one just filling up the top one up the entire time. That's sort of like what these collateralized loan obligations do. So they take all these loans, they throw it into this, essentially this a box, right? It's not a box. It's just, throw it into this package. And then they chop it up and then give it what they refer to as tranches. And so the very top tranche is like that very first champagne glass. It doesn't pay a whole lot in interest, but it's really secure. So essentially, like, it's going to get paid. Not all these companies are going to pay their loan, but most of them will. And the ones that do, that top glass is going to get filled up first. So you can buy into the upper tranche, low interest, right, on it, because it's a fairly secure loan, even though everything that has built up this collateralized loan obligation is complete crap. These are businesses that aren't even that are so bad that they couldn't even sell junk bonds. So now this is the issue that we face with this, right? Is that now these CLOs have created these packages with these upper tranches that have an investment grade quality to it that are moving into retirement funds. And, you know, this is the scary part of it. So now grandpa's retirement is sitting in an CLO upper tranche that is essentially backed by a bunch of garbage, like horrible garbage. And this is the scary part that comes up from like the whole idea of CLOs. Once these things start to crash, the businesses start to fail, those loans don't get paid, and then eventually the collateralized loan obligation fails. And that's where I think a lot of people's concern is with these things. Me personally see that as a big deal. Like I see that as an issue. On top of that is an even bigger issue, and that is to think, are there credit default swaps that are backing those CLOs? So if the CLO fails, a credit default swap kicks in and gets paid, like an insurance policy. How many credit, now those operate in the shadow banking system. So nobody really essentially knows how many of those things exist or if they even exist. Like I'm sure some people probably know they exist because somebody will tell them, hey, I bought one or I own one or I sell one, right? So there's probably ways of discovering how many of these things exist. But ultimately, they operate in the shadow banking system, which is meaning that they're not operating in the traditional banking system, which is not part of their data. See, this is where I think a lot of times the confusion really begins on how come they don't look at this and how come they don't look at that, is because they have the traditional banking system and then they got the shadow banking system that operates essentially in the shadows of the traditional banking system. It's not shady banking. It's just not the traditional banking system. Essentially, it's private money or something of that nature. And it's not operating in a way that says, hey, we are a traditional banking system, government rules, all this other stuff. They're operating in the shadows of the banking system, operating with private money or, you know, in that sort of simple explanation of it. So now those credit default swaps, that can be a very big deal. If those things start kicking in, like you could find that all of a sudden there's insurance companies who've sold these on mass proportions that can't pay them, much like AIG started to fail. Right? This is what happened during the great financial crisis. And a lot of people watched that movie, The Big Short. This is like exactly like what was happening in The Big Short, right? Like what I'm describing, same thing, right? So this is like where my major concern comes in. People look at the CLOs and I'm thinking, okay, CLOs is a big deal, but what about the credit default swaps? That's an even bigger deal, right? And nobody really seems to talk about those because really there's no way of like, how do you know? Like they operate in the shadow banking. All right, moving on. Thanks for the question, too. I appreciate it. All right, 586 people watching with 160 likes. Please go hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. By hitting that like button, the YouTube algorithm will pick up the video, spread it around for more people to join in. All right. I bought too early, already sold again. All right. Looks like someone from the Trump administration has slipped into the comments. That would be so awesome. I would love that. I would love to have somebody from the Trump administration all up in my feed here. That would be so cool. All right. Prepared Californian, how are seniors going to weather getting Social Security and Medicare cut? I don't know. Like, and that's again, like this is a question that I think everybody has to answer for themselves. Like, here I'm in a position in which that I work a day job. I pay into Social Security and I kind of expect it, but I don't count on it. And actually, I don't even really think about it being a thing, right? But I see it on my paycheck and I see it going out. And really, I think to myself, well, why don't you just consider that the old people tax? And if you're going to get it, somebody else is going to have to be paying into it because that's the way it really works. And if it's there, it's there. And if it's not, it's not. And no big deal. I mean, it's a big deal, but it's no big deal if you don't make it a big deal because I don't give it that meaning. So I understand why other people out there have it as a really big deal because it's very important and it means a lot to them and it's their very way of life and stuff. Me personally, I'm not conditioning my economy, my personal economy and myself. I'm not going to position myself to count on that. In fact, I'm pretty much counting on it not being there. Right? I expect it, but not really. And because I mean, it's there. They say you're gonna get it. Okay, here's your expectation. You're gonna get it. And it's like, okay, I have an expectation, really low. It's like, but it's there. So what's going to happen? I don't know. How did you build up your economy? Did you build it up so that you can tolerate a cut in Social Security? Most people don't. Most people, like, they have their life like right at the very limit. In fact, it's like, a little bit above the limit. Right? Like they go into debt every single month just by a little bit. All right, moving down. Taxes are a tough scene in the general. We are tax mules. Will Fed rates come down, you think? I want to buy the dip. It feels so opportunistic to a young buck. How long do I wait? I got $35,000 cash. Dollar cost average. Don't think about the interest rate cut. Think about the message that they deliver with it, and make sure that you are positioning yourself in a way that says, if it does turn down, I'm not going to be in a lot of misery from that. Right? But again, don't think about the interest rate cut. Like, if you are basing your idea off of interest rate cuts, then you are not following this channel. Like, you haven't been following this channel. Because I've been talking about how they deliver the interest rate cut with a message. And that message that they deliver will have a profound impact on the inflation expectation of the market. If that inflation expectation is elevated, right, interest rates will have a tendency to rise. If that inflation expectation is diminished, then the interest rates will have a tendency to fall. They can deliver the message and change the way that the market receives that information in order to have the interest rate adjustment go which way they want it to, regardless of what they do with the Fed funds rate. 6 months to a year down the road, that's when those interest rate adjustments will have an impact. Right? Well, that's when they're really noticeable into the economy. They have an impact right away, but it takes 6 months to a year before they have a profound impact, a reality to the economy in which that you would say, okay, this is what the interest rates have done. Right? But the immediate impact comes from the message that they deliver, and they know how to use specific sentences. Again, this is coming from Philip Jefferson's speech. We broke it down, how they use their communications in order to adjust the interest rates, and how it is that the interest rate adjustment itself is less important than the message that they deliver with it. Are we doing this because of a recessionary pressure? Are we doing this as a general support for the economy? If you're generally supporting the economy, that's probably going to have an inflationary pressure to it if you lower the interest rates. We lower the interest rates to generally support the economy. That's going to be an inflationary pressure, right? People are going to look at it as just like, man, this is going to cause house prices to go up. This is going to cause everybody, all these, like, lowering interest rates causes inflation, right? And this is where the people would perceive it. However, if the Federal Reserve says, oh, we're cutting interest rates because of a recessionary pressure, then people are going to be like, oh, yoink, and they're going to start, pulling in on all their economic activity. Okay? And then you're going to start seeing that things like buying into the bond market is going to be a more attractive situation. Whereas inflationary pressure is going to cause them to say, hey, I want a higher return on my capital investment. And you'll see interest rates rise. It's hard to understand how this works, considering that the way that the Federal Reserve had always conducted themselves prior to the great financial crisis was through the mechanics of interest rate adjustments. And that worked. It worked for them, essentially. In fact, they hardly even communicated about it at all. They would just do the interest rate adjustment, and that was enough to have a profound impact on the economy. Like, you would just wake up one day and Greenspan was like, oh yeah, we moved interest rates, and people would be like, whoa, what the hell's going on? And then they'd have to go and start figuring out what it is that he was trying to communicate out there. It was very confusing. Nobody knew what the hell was going on. And this is how the Federal Reserve conducted themselves for the longest time. Like, they did that. They even had, like, they had reasonings and belief that it was better to do it that way. And as time went on, they found that once they were getting closer and closer to the lower bound of zero, which is when the Fed funds rate, like, literally gets to zero, that's considered the lower bound. Like, they cannot go any farther than that. They're stuck. And by hitting the lower bound of zero, they run out of monetary policy. Now, all of a sudden, you can't wake up one morning and say, oh, wait a minute, interest rates have moved down because they're at zero. That right there, if you can understand how that right there is the failure of the Federal Reserve's monetary policy, and that happened back in the great financial crisis over, what is it, almost 20 years ago now, right? Or going on 20 years. So it's important. Most people don't think about that. They don't think about how it is that the Federal Reserve literally failed at monetary policy, failed at everything that they were doing. And since nobody recognized the failure, they were able to switch the way that they conduct themselves. And so all of a sudden, forward guidance became a very common tool. We are going to keep interest rates lower for longer, zero interest rate policy, spewing this information out, many governors coming out, many presidents coming out, all this communication going out there to the mainstream media, then started developing things like the dot plot and started figuring like doing press conferences after the meetings. They started coming up with all these different ways of delivering the message. And then if you start diving into the research of how it is that they were doing this communication, you can start finding that many central banks around the world were doing this at the exact same time, because a lot of central banks were getting to the lower bound of zero. Some of them we had to even go negative, which was an unheard of thing to do, but some of them actually did. And so with all these central banks around the world all going to zero, they all had to take on somewhat of the same practice, which is the credible threat theory, right? This is where I came up with this credible threat theory. So now, as many of them started to figure out how it is that they could communicate to their people, because they knew that if they just deliver a message on monetary policy, that only a couple of people out there would be like, oh, dude, I'm a geek. I'll listen to monetary policy. Please tell me, what is it, right? And they would actually absorb monetary policy. Most of the people out there can really care less about monetary policy. Certainly not going to go out there and find it attractive to go and look for it, right? So when you put it in a meme, when you put it in a music video, when you have it on Facebook and TikTok and all these other places, and you're delivering a particular message over and over again, and the central bankers say, hey, we can use these particular social medias in order to deliver this message, this is the monetary policy. All right? Before, they didn't want to talk about it. Now they're trying to think, oh, how do we communicate to people who wouldn't look at monetary policy? Well, if it pops up on TikTok, if you have all these people talking about it who normally wouldn't be talking about it, like things on The View or something of that nature, and I'm not trying to say that people who watch The View aren't into economics, I'm just saying that generally most people aren't into economics, right? And then to think about it all of a sudden popping up and they're talking deep monetary policy on The View, it's just like, this isn't your subject. This isn't your topic. This isn't most people. Like, even guys who sit around the bar don't talk around monetary policy to it. They usually talk politics or talk, sports or something of that nature. Monetary policy in itself is such a boring ass thing that nobody really even considers it to be something that you would want to follow or listen to. And so when the Federal Reserve would speak on it, most people would be like, what the hell did he say? Like, I don't even understand what he said. So instead, they have people who interpret that, and they come out in a way that they describe it that is very entertaining and thought-provoking and scary or whatever, and they sell that through the newspapers and media and stuff like that. Once you get it, it's just like, okay, so now I know how they deliver the message, because they know that they couldn't just deliver it in a typical fashion, to say through the news broadcast. They actually deliver it through Facebook memes and music videos, and just like, it's the weirdest places. And generally most people don't recognize it, because it's looked at like the people who are making this content, they're like almost like they're insulting the government in a way, right? But what they are creating is a feeling and an expectation within the people themselves that then becomes a benefit to the Federal Reserve. And that's why they deliver such a message. Most people don't realize that quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4 failed to produce an inflationary scenario. Now, this is scary for the Federal Reserve to think about, because they went and took their balance sheet from $850 billion, $850 billion, to over $4.5 trillion It was a quadrupling of the money supply and failed to get an inflationary expectation out of it. They screwed it up bad with the delivery of their message. Now, I believe that there was going to be hyperinflation. I was looking at the news broadcast and following all the people and diving headfirst into silver and thinking that there was going to be hyperinflation right around the corner, and watching it in 2011 run up to $50 an ounce, thinking I was the smartest person in the entire world and everybody should have listened to me, only to watch it fall all the way back down into the teens and wondering, man, what the hell happened? I thought the dollar was on its way out. I mean, they just went and printed up all this money. Ungodly amount, right? I mean, quadrupled the money supply. This last go around during COVID, it was a doubling of the money supply. Yeah, it was more money printed, like more dollars printed, but on a percentage basis, back in the great financial crisis, quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4, far more money printed back then on a percentage basis than what took place here just recently. So knowing that money printer go burr doesn't necessarily cause prices to go up, because understanding that if that money ends up in the banking system and on a bank account, or not in a bank account, but essentially in the bank's accounts, right, and never gets loaned out, then it doesn't chase any goods and services. If you don't sever the supply chain and create shortages and give people a bunch of stimulus, then you're not going to find inflationary pressure coming from the money printer, because that money printing at the lower bound of zero interest rate policy is actually a deflationary concept, and most people have their minds blown to try and think about that. But if you go and follow Dr. Lacey Hunt, who is very good at describing this, when you have money at an interest rate of zero and you have a very low return on capital investment, your capital investment actually goes negative, meaning that over time your purchasing power falls, but the return you got wasn't enough to beat the inflation essentially. So here you have interest rates at the lower bound of zero. You have a return on capital investment that is very low. You're not returning that capital back into the economy to create, more businesses and more opportunities out there. You're essentially just becoming a consumer of the goods. There is no real advancement within the economy itself. And this is the global slowdown that we were facing back in the day. Low interest rates was the major problem. You want to read a great piece, it's Monetary Policy Strategies for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World. And this is where the Federal Reserve really got their problem on just trying to raise interest rates, is that the neutral interest rate, which is the rate that is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy, was really close to zero too. And this is the problem of stimulating the economy, is that they drop the Fed funds rate to zero. Neutral interest rate is close to zero. There's no stimulating effect from it. But if they raise interest rates, well, now this has restriction upon the economy, because once they start moving up in any amount, essentially, if the Fed funds rate starts to increase, it starts moving above the neutral interest rate almost immediately. So now moving the Fed funds rate up is very difficult, as any move above zero is essentially a restriction on the economy. They had to get the neutral interest rate elevated in order to regain the monetary policy of using the interest rate adjustment of the Fed funds rate. The neutral interest rate prevented them from using that. When it was at zero, very close to zero, the lower bound, the Fed funds rate was not an effective tool. It just simply didn't work. It was good at restricting the economy, but it couldn't stimulate the economy. They would drop it to zero, and then they would have to do a bunch of forward guidance screaming that they were going to keep it low forever and do a bunch of money printing and scare the shit out of people and believe that there was going to be a bunch of inflation, but it didn't occur. Not back in the great financial crisis. They got it up to 2% a couple of times, but for the most part, it ran below 2% consistently the entire time. They couldn't even get it to 2%. That's why I find it so amusing when everybody was just like, well, the Federal Reserve is trying to get to a 2% target. And I'm like, never in the history of time have they ever been able to do that. Why would you think they would do it now? That just blows me away when I hear these smart economists talk about how they're trying to get to a 2% target. And I'm thinking, no, they're not. They're trying to get a 2% average inflation rate over time. 2% goal is the long run view. That means like over the long run. Right now, they have a monetary policy that's seeking to achieve inflation that is moderately above 2% for some time. And I have stated that just about every single video for the last 400 videos that I've done. And I keep saying it over and over again because I want to make sure that people have heard it so that when the consensus statement comes out, that is the statement on long run policy and strategies, when that new consensus statement comes out, I'm looking for those words to have changed. If they didn't change, then we know that we're going to be experiencing inflation higher for longer. But if those words have changed and they're not there anymore, then we can expect a difference within the inflation expectations from the Federal Reserve and their delivery system. I mean, I'm the only one who's talking like this, guys. I know I am. There's nobody else who's going to be breaking this stuff down like this. I am the only one who has a credible threat theory delivered in the way that I have that is so consistent. It's time running. Like I can take this back years, right? And show you through all the speeches, through all the documents, how it is that they are doing this. And it's working. And that's what blows me away. It's really working. Yeah. Think about how much inflation expectation is coming from the credible threats of tariffs. And I mean, I know they're real. I know it's real. I know they're real. I know they're really going to happen and all that other stuff. All I'm guessing is that the Federal Reserve is loving the situation. Right? They're sitting back going, oh man, we're really concerned about them tariffs, considering that we wanted an elevated inflation expectation and we're getting it. Yeah, we're really concerned that them tariffs were just working too good, right, for the elevated inflation expectation. They're not concerned about it. They're not trying to get inflation down to 2%. They're just simply not. So it's just like it's easier to understand once they are not trying to do that, then like they're going to be cutting rates right away, and it's like, why? Why would they be doing that? They're right where they want to be. Unemployment isn't skyrocketing. Inflation is moderately above 2%. They're good. They're good. Like this is it. This is where this sweet spot. This is where they want to be. Right? And if things change, if and unemployment rises significantly, or if inflation happens to jump out of control, or actually goes down, all right, if that was to actually take place, I mean, can you think about like what would happen if all of a sudden like all the tariff scare just did get like a 90-day suspension or something like that? Like talk about the ultimate credible threat theory, man. That would really be playing out then. I don't expect something like that. All I am thinking is that if you relieve the tension, think about how many people have been pent up projects, pent up investments, pent up, right? With the idea they don't know what's happening. The fear, uncertainty, and doubt has kept them restricted. When you start alleviating the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, think about the flood, right? There's people who want to participate. They want to build a deck. They want to build a house. They want to go out and start a business. They want to do these things out there, but they're concerned. They don't know what the hell's happening out there, so now it's pent up. And this is where I'm getting at, is that you have elevated interest rates. You have a neutral interest rate that's rising off of the elevated inflation expectation. When that neutral interest rate moves closer to the Fed funds rate, it becomes less restriction on the economy. The higher the elevated inflation expectation, the less restriction on the economy. I know that's strange to think about, but that's what's taken place. People wonder, how come it is we have this resilient economy? I'm the only one who's explaining it. I'm the only one, and I explained this in videos years ago, saying this could very well take place where we find a resilient economy that nobody is understanding why, and it's because the elevated inflation expectation is pulling the neutral interest rate closer to the Fed funds rate. The neutral interest rate is the rate that's neither accommodating nor restricting the economy. It's getting closer to the Fed funds rate. Think about that. That's less restriction upon the economy. If all of a sudden you alleviate the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and you have the Fed funds rate dropped, right, for whatever reason, unemployment rises, think about the rocket ship that would be on, right? Pent up demand, pent up projects, pent up energy, and a lowering of the Fed funds rate far enough below neutral to actually stimulate the economy. Now, the only way that would work is with the credible threat theory of tariffs pushing the inflation expectation ever higher. That's the way it would work. Now, I'm not trying to say that's what would happen or that's what is going to happen. All I'm saying is man is not set up for something like that. Time will tell. I don't know if that's the case, all right? But it seems to me that every time I hear about elevated inflation expectations out there, in my mind, I'm thinking, man, that raises the neutral interest rate, which makes the economy less restricted. I get it. There's a lot of stuff that's happening out there that restricts people's opinions of what, or that has people's opinions restriction of the economy being very different. Like it's, these people not making deals. There's all these, all these charges and all these tariffs and all the stuff that's going to happen. And that's what's slowing the, screwing up the economy or whatever. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's a lot of noise that's happening out there. We don't know exactly what it is. We hear threats of it changing every single day. All right. Nobody seems to know. I mean, I hear this like there's going to be what, 104% tariff on China at midnight tonight. Has that changed? I don't know. That was earlier today. There might have been a change to it. There's no tariffs on lumbers. Oh, by the way, there's a 34% duty on lumber. I mean, what is it? Right? Nobody knows. Like right now, I'm finding articles that are literally on the same day saying lumber tariffs have been canceled on top of lumber tariffs are now implied. All right. Nobody knows. And that's the way they're keeping it. It's because if you have that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and raise the inflation expectation, and then pent up all the projects, but the moment that you alleviate all those issues and you bring some certainty to the market, right? People will start flooding it and start pouring it. Wow, look at all these comments. 586 people watching. My goodness. Saw it up there at 600 and something at one point. That was awesome. All right. What would happen if the neutral interest rate became restrictive? What would happen? The neutral interest rate doesn't become restricted. The Fed funds rate, the neutral interest rate is neutral. That's when the Fed funds rate is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy. The Fed is right now in a position in which that they are restricted because they're somewhat above neutral. Now, if neutral continues to rise and it moves above the Fed funds rate, then the Fed funds rate sitting still would be stimulating to the economy because now it's below the neutral interest rate. That's on an elevated inflation expectation, if it continues to pull that neutral interest rate higher. And we continue to have people operating within the economy because you need that to take place as well. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. Screws down here. All right, stagflation. Thank you, All Nighter, for posting that link too, man. I really appreciate it. Let's see here. Hit the thumbs up for the economy, dude. Thank you. I have 2 sawmills and I have got a ton of eastern cedar logs. Nobody right now can get cedar logs. Stagflation, albeit not as severe as the 70s and coming, so design your portfolio as such. Yeah, and I kind of agree with that. I think a lot of times we look at the issues that we were facing back in the 70s and in trying to overlap that as what is happening today, and I just don't see it as the same issue. You got to think about it. Back in the 70s, they really, the world didn't want the dollar. Like they were like, screw you guys. We don't it was so bad. And I brought this up before, and I think this is a really good example of it. It was so bad, the dollar, like the desire for the dollar or the trust for the dollar was so bad that Jimmy Carter, his administration, the Treasury had to sell treasuries with the promise to pay it back in German marks and Swiss francs. Think about it. The United States Treasury was issuing out bonds that were due back in a foreign currency. See, this is somewhat of the same. This is why it kind of blows people away to think about something like this when you really take it to the world right now, because the world has done something very similar to the United States. When the United States was issuing out treasuries that were due in a foreign currency like German marks and Swiss francs, this is what other nations are doing with the United States dollar. They are writing debts, sovereign debts that are due in US dollars, just like the United States was writing sovereign debt that was due in German marks and Swiss francs. See, this is what other nations are doing out there. This is what other corporations and people are doing outside of the United States. When they create those instruments of debt, those contracts, they get used as dollars. along with the dollars that they borrowed. They're creating dollars all on their own. Like the United States is sitting back there going, man, they're creating dollars outside of the United States and doing transactions with those dollars that are not even have anything to do with the United States. So you're understanding how deep the financial markets go, how this really rules the world, rules the world, right? The debt issuance, the sovereign assets, the safe and liquid assets of the U.S. Treasuries. When you start really looking at how intertwined the dollar starts to move into other instruments of debt that don't have anything to do with us, this is where the problem really starts to like creep in on like, man, there is no way that the Fed can print at a pace that is fast enough to cover all those dollar denominated debts. There is no way. And when they do, what are they going to buy? US Treasuries? Send the government into unsustainable debt path? That moment is coming where the debt will come due, like doesn't have any, this is not our debt. Right? That's the problem that I think most people face. They're like, well, screw it, they'll just accept it in another currency. No, they won't. You know why? They're not going to accept it in a foreign currency or another currency is because they owe in dollars. They are owed in dollars and they owe in dollars. Right? Everybody wants the dollars. Nobody wants that foreign currency. You might be able to get them to do a deal in gold or maybe Bitcoin to a lesser extent, but all those other nations, they are not going to be able to provide enough currency to cover all the dollar denominated debt. Even if they were wanting to get paid in another currency, there's not enough of it. And this is the problem. This is the problem. The Federal Reserve cannot print at a pace that is fast enough to cover all that dollar-denominated debt, and it will at some point come due. That's the scariest thing that I think a lot of times, like understanding it from like the position of Brent Johnson or Jeff Snyder, like those guys got, like they understand that whole euro dollar, the dollar milkshake theory. They got a good grasp on it. I kind of get it comparatively to those guys. I've watched their presentations. I've listened to it. I've internalized it somewhat. If you go and read the Federal Reserve document, dollar funding stresses in China, it does a very good description breaking down from the Federal Reserve's point of view what it is that's taken place. So it's happening. And like to understand that is the biggest deal in the entire world. And most people are just kind of stuck on, something more localized, like robots manufacturing here in the United States or something. And I'm like, yeah, we really, really like. I know it's an important topic, especially when it comes to like the personal, like having a good manufacturing job or something like that. But really, like the bigger issue is so much huger than like whether or not robots are taking over your job. I kid you not. It's like so much bigger than that. That's why people ask me, "Are you worried about your job?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, kind of, but really, if you want to ask me what I'm worried about." It's this unsustainable debt path that the government is on, the Federal Reserve needing to figure out what asset they're going to buy in order to print up enough money to cover all the dollar denominated debt that at some point will come due. And that is going to be, I don't know. I don't know what that'll be. I don't know what that'll look like. Will the Fed buy up, sovereign, the sovereign nations debt, like buy the debt of a foreign nation or something like that and put that on their balance sheet? It's hard to say, but all the debt that's going to come due at some point, I know that the Fed can't print enough to cover it. They just can't. There's no way. All right. Luke Patterson, $5. With the already low unemployment rate, does the U.S. have enough workers for all the new factory job tariffs hope to create? I just have a very serious doubt that we are going to see any kind of resurgence of manufacturing here in the United States. I know a lot of people are wishful thinking and hopeful thinking, and I really appreciate the $5. I'm not trying to downplay your question or anything like that, but I think this is very unrealistic to have manufacturing returning to the United States. We just broke down in Cantillon's essay like 200-year-old understanding of why it is that the manufacturing leaves, right? And I can simply read it to you again. just so you can just the one paragraph so that it does make sense, because this is something that he has reiterated time and time again, right? And it says this. This is what he says in this. It goes this. It is true that the continued increase of money will, in time and by its abundance, cause land and labor costs to rise in a state. Products and manufactured goods will, in the long run, cost so much that foreigner will gradually cease to buy them. If you are not selling to the foreigners, then you're not going to have a good manufacturing base. You have to be able to have a customer outside of your nation. Right? So they will cease to buy them and will adjust to buying them cheaper elsewhere. Right? So understanding that right there from the very beginning, that if you are manufacturing at a higher price than the guy over there or some other foreigner, right, you are not going to be able to compete. It's just not going to, right? Especially if they're making it cheaper and you have a higher standard of living. He says that right here. By imperceptible degrees, this will ruin the business and manufacturing of the state. If you are not exporting and those manufacturers are making it for themselves, this is going to ruin the business and the manufacturers of the state. You're not going to be able to reverse this. Why? Right? This is the same cause. The abundance of money will raise the rents and property owners and will put them into the habit of importing many articles from foreign countries. See, this is what happens. You get the money, you increase that abundance of money, you start constantly importing the foreign production because it's going to be cheaper. Right? Oh, good Lord, these are natural consequences. The wealth acquired by a state through trade, labor, and economy will gradually plunge it into luxury. Every time. Right? It says it's the natural consequence. It's the natural consequence. If you are a manufacturing powerhouse and you know how to be one of the most industrious countries in the entire world and you produce the world's greatest stuff, you're going to send that wonderful stuff out there to the world. The world's going to send you their money and you're going to increase your standard of living, which is the move into luxury. And this is the natural consequence. The wealth acquired by the state through trade, labor, and the economy will gradually plunge it into luxury. States that rise by trade do not fail to sink afterwards. If you rise by trade, you will sink afterwards. There are steps that might be, but are not, taken to stop this decline. But it is always true that when the state has a positive balance of trade and an abundance of money, it seems powerful. And it really is, as long as this abundance continues. And that's the problem. You have to have abundance continue. You have to have the abundance of U.S. treasuries continue, and you have to have the abundance of foreign trade continue to come in. Because here in the United States, we produce a consumer. There's nothing we can do. Even attempting to try and bring manufacturing back to the United States means that we would want to try and sell our manufactured goods to foreigners to bring in new money. If you don't bring in that new money, that abundance of it, we are going to fall into decline. And this is the problem we face. We have to continue the abundance. And I don't like it. I don't like the idea of it. I mean, it's not my idea. This is the natural consequence. This is how the natural economic forces are working. We can try to go against them. Right? We can try and force another outcome. What that looks like, if you want to know what that looks like to try and force a different outcome after you have become a manufacturing powerhouse and you have moved into luxuries and you have this luxurious way of life that is no longer competitive against the rest of the world, what it looks like is a boot coming down on the face of humanity. That's what reverses the luxurious experience, is when they take over the manufacturing. When they say, no, you're not going to be importing those foreign goods and try to take control over it. I mean, you want to see something? Go and watch Animal Farm. Go read the book, right? I have the movie, and I have my kids watch it occasionally. That movie was developed by the CIA. Thank you, Luke, for the $5. I really appreciate you, man, with the support for the channel. All right. What is this? Chivas? $2. Thank you so much. Adventures. Check out your channel. All right. I'm about 32K in credit card debt. Bro, 32K is a lot. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of money. And I tell you, I don't know if I've necessarily been to $32,000 in credit card debt, but I did have $32,000 of debt, right? And it's a lot. That's a lot of money to have at one time, especially on credit cards. My only advice to you, right, is to get in the mindset of paying that credit card off at any cost. And that means, like, here's the thing. When I made the commitment that I was going to get out of credit card debt, I didn't have a whole lot going on as far as extra income, whatever the hell extra is beyond the money you already make, right? But I didn't have a whole lot of money coming in. If somebody sent me $20 for, like, here's a birthday card and there was $20 or something, like, I mean, whatever, whatever happened to come to me, even if it was something as simple as, and I'll put it on my credit card. And I knew, like, when you're putting $20 on a credit card that has $9,872 worth of, outstanding debt on it, it doesn't seem like you're really doing a whole lot, right? But I guarantee you, the energy shift that happens within you will then start bringing you more experiences where those $20 are going to start coming to you frequently, where you can take it. And if you continue to take it down and pay off the debt, it'll start happening in such a way that you'll start noticing that debt getting paid off faster and faster and faster. It is one of the most surprising things. I've talked to a lot of people, and I don't know exactly what it is other than just being in the energy of it. You get that subconscious thought that says, hey, I want to be out of debt. And then you stop buying coffee, right? You stop buying weed, you stop buying beer, you stop, driving places you don't need to really go to. You stop doing these sort of things, and then you realize, man, I am almost out of debt. And then one day, right? And it's going to take a while because you got 32,000, man. That's a lot, right? But one day you'll do it. And if you're committed to it, it'll happen a lot faster than you can imagine, right? Especially if you start taking on like a second job to get it done, right? Then it'll really happen fast. Once it does, some weird magical experience takes place, and it doesn't last very long, but it is a really wonderful time. Is that moment that you are alleviated of all that debt and you do not owe anybody. You don't have medical, you don't have student debt, you don't have any of the credit card debt, you don't have car loans, you don't have any of that stuff, right? All of a sudden, the world becomes a very pleasant place to be. And it's strange. It's like the strangest thing in the world. Like, all of a sudden, sounds are great, like, no matter what they are. Like, you're just listening to the city and it sounds wonderful, right? The coffee in the gas station, of all places. Like, I mean, I live in the Pacific Northwest. We really take pride in our coffee up here. You go into the gas station and they're making their cheap gas station coffee, and it smells really good, right? This is the thing that happens to you when you get out of debt. All of a sudden, you start looking at life in a much better fashion. You're looking at things in a way that is like never before have you seen it. And it was always because you were living under the stress of having this debt burden over you. And it's weird because this is the way most people live. And I know I lived this way for a long time. And when I got myself out of debt, when I did a video of doing it. When I finally had $3,000 of credit card debt left to pay, and I finally had $3,000 in cash. And I said, when this two happened at the same time, when I have enough money in cash to pay off my credit card, I'm going to go do it. Right? And that day had come. So I took $3,000 cash. I paid off my credit card. I did that video. I actually went down to the bank, I went in and asked them, hey, is it all cool? I mean, I'm not going to show you guys. It's going to be pointed up towards the ceiling or whatever. They were totally cool with me going in there with the camera, and it was one of the coolest videos that I think I had ever done. It was so fun, so nice to finally be out of that debt. And I know, like, other people who had experienced, like, essentially a lifetime, like from the time that they were 20 till the time that they were 40, right? Just recently, a buddy of mine had just experienced this. He got a bit of a I don't necessarily inheritance, but he got some money from a family sale of a home. He was able to get a few $1,000s in from that, paid off all his debt, his car, and he is walking around debt free. And he is just like, dude, I signed up for the gym. I'm doing like these other things. Like, he's like looking at property, a whole new experience for him. right? Something that he had never had before. He was just paying his bills, just trying to make it through life. And now he has a little bit of money in his pocket, paid off them debts, and now he is like consciously thinking, man, I am going to buy into property. I'm going to become the property owner. You know, it's just like he didn't necessarily work hard to get that done, but he has been working hard to get to this point in his life. Right? I mean, you know, it's a family thing, family money that happens, you know, throughout life. I mean, I remember I was completely broke, had nothing, and didn't even have any money in like at all. Like I didn't even have $10. And I'm trying to like get to work, trying to get my family to work. My car's breaking down, and it's just like, ugh. And my mom gave me $300. I remember she gave me three $100 bills. And I remember I took those three $100 bills and I put them in an envelope and I stuck them in a safe. And I thought to myself, man, what a relief. Oh my God, what a relief to have three $100 bills. I mean, I had all this debt, had all these problems, had all these bills, had all this issue. But having that three $100 bills in the safe said to me that if an unforeseen bill pops up, I at least have some cash. I have some cash there, and it feels good to have that. And like just something as simple as that was like all the difference in the world. It was literally shortly after that that I started like getting very close to then paying off the debts and all the other stuff. And mom was just trying to, you know, just help me out and just, you know, I guess help me feel better about the situation or whatever. All right. 45 degrees north. Thank you for the 1999. Thanks for the time and effort you put into your channel. Appreciate the info insights. God's peace be with you. Well, thank you very much, man. I really appreciate it. 45 degrees north for the 1999. You guys are very supportive of the channel, and I can never thank you enough for all that. For all that support. It's just been an incredible experience going along the way here. And, you know, knowing that I know when I started this channel, what I was intending to do was to learn as much as I could about economics, and I still feel that's what I'm doing today, right? I still feel that every time I crack open the Cantillon essay, every time I read another Federal Reserve speech, every time I try to break down the credible threat theory, to me, that is me attempting to learn, and I know that this whole thing never would have existed if it wasn't for the viewers of this channel. Like, I never would have gone down the path. Like, I never would have figured out the credible threat theory or any of that other stuff if it wasn't for the viewers of this channel, the comments, the, you know, sharing of the links, the discussions that we have had. It's like you guys are definitely helping, not helping. You guys are the creators of the credible threat theory, like the whole channel. It was just me who happened to be the one putting out the links and the videos and stuff like that. But if it wasn't for the comments and literally like everybody joining in together, there's no way we would have figured it out this way. Right? Where is my dice? Do I have dice in here? Oh, Sarah's got to get some stuff out of here. I don't think I have any dice in here, guys. Sorry. I don't know where they are. No dice. Alright. I'm a creator. Where my cut? Yeah. You are, Larry. You know. And that's just, you know, and that's really what it comes down to. It's like, I really feel that everybody, I know not everybody is going to go out there and create a YouTube channel, but I really do feel that everybody has something in this world that they need, that they have inside of them. There's a passion inside of them that they can share with this world that is helpful and useful. Like everybody has this. And it may not be rewarded necessarily straight up in a monetary style. It may come back to you in all kinds of different fashions, but being in a position in which that you are being helpful and useful, it's almost as if like there's no other option but for you to be rewarded for that. And that's really why I think, man, I'm trying to be helpful and useful. I want to be helpful and useful with the information. I want people to be able to internalize it and then, you know, say, yes, I can see it within my own life. You know, I got a lot of people who, you know, who say, man, you don't give any information, you just repeat yourself, you're not really giving anything valid out there or something of that nature. And I'm thinking, well, that's the meaning that you have given it. Like, I'm trying to give it meaning in a way that says you can use this information. I mean, if you didn't know about the credible threat theory before, you weren't going to learn it unless you watched the channel. Once you have seen it, once you know what the credible threat theory is, even if you don't like it, even if you don't even if you don't think it's right, like, you think it's an incorrect view, you still now have it internalized and you can see it when it happens out there on the mainstream media. Like, even if you don't believe it, it's still internalized in such a way that it comes across inside of your understanding of what's going on inside of economics. Right? Every time they communicate out there and give that forward guidance, it's like you can't help but to understand that this is having a reaction by the markets. Like, the Fed doesn't do anything, but yet people's expectations and feelings about what it is that's taking place has a huge impact on the markets, and it's all received by their communication. Like, I understand for a lot of people it'd be like, oh, that's the way they've always done it. I don't think so. Right? They didn't. Like, they used to do it in a way where they were very quiet, and then they developed the ways to communicate. And that right there, most people don't know. Wow, look at all these. Right on. John McGuire, thank you so much for the $10. 30 years of C-suite manufacturing experience, set up factories in the US and China to get simple factory up and running is 3 years per proposition, and that's assuming you know what you're doing. Yeah, I'm not saying, like, I mean, you can bring, like, can see bringing manufacturing back in some way, but just like that meaningful way. One that says, hey, we produce the world's greatest stuff and send it out there to the world. No, like that kind of production, I don't see that happening. People like want to argue, like, oh, dude, look at all this list of stuff that we manufacture. And I'm like, oh, yeah, we produce some really good stuff. Like, we produce high-tech weaponry. We produce a ton of agriculture. We produce all kinds of, like, wonderful things out there, or at least what some people might consider wonderful. It's the amount that we import as opposed to export. So we import a hell of a lot more stuff than we export. And that's just it. That's all there is to it. And we're going to continue down that path, because if we don't, then chaos and misery will follow. And it's like there's no reversing that. Like, if we were still on a gold standard or something of that nature, then I would be like, okay, well, maybe, maybe something might happen. But considering that we are a debt-based currency, and if you follow things like Triffin's dilemma, or research Triffin's dilemma, being the custodian of the world reserve currency leaves you with a problem of trying to get those dollars out there to the world, much like what we were talking about earlier with all the dollar-denominated debt. How does the Federal Reserve get all those dollars out there to the rest of the world? Well, the easiest way to get dollars out there to the world is to buy their stuff. Trade deficits. And what if trade deficits isn't enough? Right? And see, this is where I find it very amusing. It's just like, wow, how are they going to get these dollars out there to the rest of the world when the demand for dollar really starts to move up? If these dollars, if these debts start to come due in such a way that they can't fulfill enough of the demand, like, what are they going to do? How are they going to get those dollars out there to the world? And as a conspiratorial-minded person from the past, I can't help but to think, okay, well, what if you do something like threaten of tariffs, get the counter tariffs, have the counter tariffs actually, like, have the tariffs actually hit, right? Everybody tariff, right? And then the U.S. just remove their portion of the tariffs, so that we're actually still getting charged the counter tariff, but we remove our part of the tariff, and now we export even more money. Yeah. See, all this idea of, like, hey, we're going to shut down all these, bad deals as far as getting money out to these people, these groups out there that are just pointless and don't really serve any purpose, and it just seems like a waste of money. To me, that it doesn't make a lot of sense on why they give it to these particular groups. What makes a lot of sense is that they are giving it out there to groups, just any old group. Because, again, if you think about Triffin's dilemma and trying to get the money out there, if you gave it to a group of people who were very sensible, then they wouldn't just be sending that money all over the place. What they're trying to do is fill the sluices during those times. Like right now, they're not trying to do it, but during those times they are. And so, like, what better way to just get the money to go out there and just find its way into the economy than to give it to a group of people who are just going to be wasteful with it? It's like one of the easiest ways. It's like literally you don't even have to try, you don't even have to count on them for anything. It's just like, here you go, just, wow, you guys really got rid of it fast, didn't you? I mean, you want to see evidence of it, just think about the homeless. Like, I can't talk about this particular topic, so I'm not going to say the word again. So hopefully you guys carry on with it. But ultimately, that particular issue is one that gets this channel demonetized. I don't know why. Right? And the algorithm kills it. But how much money they spent here in my local area to have almost like no relief. In fact, it only got worse, the problem is just another sign that they weren't really trying to fix the problem. Like, the problem's not fixable, for one, right? I mean, it's just like, it's the inequality, and you can just read this book, the Cantillon essay. It'll explain why it is that we have such massive disproportion between the people. Right. But when you have a bunch of new money that pours into an area and all the property values move up, and then a regular job isn't enough to cut it anymore, you're going to find a bunch of homeless people, right? The separation between the rich and the poor. But here, the rich people, they don't like it. Like, they don't like the view that they have of their beautiful city being covered in tents and garbage and filth and all this other stuff, right? So, they got a bunch of money. So what's the easiest way for rich people to deal with something other than throw a bunch of money at the problem? And so that's exactly what they did. They threw a ton of money, like almost like it was so much money. Like, I'm even trying to do the math on it. I'm like, guys, this is working out to like $40,000 per person or something like that you're trying to help. And it was like, this is going to be wasteful, and they're going to still be on the street, right? So all that money got spent. It's all gone. And the people that it was meant to help are still sitting there on the street. So I'm thinking, well, if you took the $40,000 that was meant to go to these people, right? Because I think that's what it kind of worked out to, the amount of people that they were trying to help and the amount of money that went into it. And I'm thinking, if you really just let them be on the streets, took the $40,000, put it into some sort of tax sheltered annuity of some sort, and then by the time they got to be like an old person who really was like old, just crippled and really about ready to die on the street, they could have this access to this money, like, make it to a certain age. Because then it would actually probably be a lot of money, and it would actually be able to take care of them in some kind of way. But throwing $40,000 at shelters and porta potties that got set on fire, and just all the crap that they did. I mean, I don't know how helpful that really is, considering that it still seems to be a growing problem. So, like, just keep throwing money at the problem, I guess, because that's like insanity, right? It wasn't going to help, but it did get the money to go out there and spread around, right? All right. When Trump refers to concessions, what is he actually referring to? If the removal of tariffs is not enough by another country, what does he want? I don't know. Like, he goes on talking about immigration and fentanyl and all this other stuff, and I'm thinking, to me, like, all that doesn't really. I'm a conspiratorial minded person, so I don't really want to get into the politics of all this other stuff, because ultimately what they are doing on the face of it is not what's happening in the reality of the situation. So I mean, the whole tariff bit, to me, again, like, I don't dive deep into, like, the details of any of this stuff. Ultimately, I'm looking back at what the market's reaction is to a lot of this stuff. I mean, you think about it, like, people were all flipping out about lumber tariffs for months. Like, how much is it going to cost to a house? Oh, no. What is it going to do to the price? Oh, no. Oh, lumber tariff. I'm freaking out, lumber tariff. And then he says, oh, there's no lumber tariff. Everybody went, that's nice. Lumber futures, do. Then we get lumber duty, right? 34% lumber duty, definitely happening. Crickets. Mainstream media, anywhere? Oh, one CNN article, one Bloomberg article. Anybody else? I mean, anybody other than Canada? No? I mean, hardly anybody? Nobody wants to talk about that, huh? Lumber futures, pretty much unchanged. Like, they still stayed down. So the threat of lumber futures ripping through the economy, through the mainstream media, pushing the idea of the cost of a house going up $10,000, all this crap, right? Whirlwinding around creates an elevated expectation within the lumber futures market. We see it moving up close to 700 per thousand, only to find out that there is no lumber tariffs. Watch the futures price fall. Then the reality of the situation happens. We do get a lumber tariff, which is a lumber duty, right? This countervailing anti-dumping duty, which had been in motion for a very long time. Madison's Lumber Reporter was talking about it 3 weeks ago. All right, nothing new as far as information. Nobody cares. Why? Because the mainstream media wasn't trying to push it. They weren't trying to scare you anymore. They did all that, relieved it, took the pressure off of the lumber futures market, and then the reality came out and nobody cared. I mean, maybe they'll care tomorrow, right? But they didn't care on Monday. I mean, they hardly cared today. Yeah. I mean, I can't make the news not hype up something that they probably shouldn't have. I even had a group. I mean, there were a really good group of guys. They're like, investor group who called me up wanting to know about the lumber industry, and they were very concerned about the lumber tariff stuff. And I said, guys, my concern is really low over this thing. Yeah, and they were like, all right, why, man? And they were like, they tried to hype it up and get all excited about some of the information. And I'm like, yeah, but still, it's like, the amount of lumber that the United States uses from Canada really isn't that much. I mean, it's a big number. It's a lot. It's a good number, right? It's huge. But I mean, I've heard people say something like, oh, 80% of the softwoods that we use here in the United States comes from Canada. And I'm like, no, that is absolutely incorrect, right? 80% of what we use, we domestically supply. Now, that may not be the same over the last few years, and I've heard that there is actually now 70% that we consume, and 30% comes from foreign production. However, of that 30%, 80% of that 30% comes from Canada, which works out to about 20 to 25%, which is what I had assumed the Canadian portion of our lumber consumption here in the United States to be. So out of all the lumber that we consume here in the United States, somewhere between 20 and 25% comes from Canada. All right. Now, that's the framing lumber, right? There might be other forestry products that might be, called into that or whatever, but that's the reality of it, right? A bunch comes from Europe, a bunch comes from Canada. What we use here in the United States, we mostly supply for ourselves. The little bit that we do get, the quarter of what we use or even less, right, that we consume comes from foreign production. Of that quarter, or that 25% that we consume from this foreign production, 80% of that comes from Canada, which again is a very small amount in the overall scheme of things. See, like, just think about it. If you had $100 worth of lumber and $25 worth of that came from Canada, right? And they doubled it, right? So you take $25 out, now it's $50 worth of lumber. You put that back into your original $100 purchase, and now your $100 purchase is $125. 100% increase on the Canadian portion of the lumber only caused a 25% increase in the actual price of the lumber, right, on the bottom line. And that's just like a rough way of looking at it. Even the silly idea of it adding like $10,000 to the price of a house. I mean, I'm thinking, you can change the $10,000 on the price of a house by the cabinets and flooring you put in it. Like the actual frame, the actual portion of the house, the cost of the house when it comes to the lumber portion of things is really kind of pretty small. I mean, it's a lot, especially nowadays, but it's pretty small. When it ran up to 1,700 per thousand, it was a lot more, right? But down at 700 or 500 per thousand, that's really not a huge number in the overall cost of the house, especially when you got land cost, labor cost, energy cost, everything else that's moving up in such a dramatic fashion, and all the rest of the building materials that go into it, appliance costs and whatever. All right. A credible threat is a statement of intent to take specific action in a certain condition are met where the threatening party is committed to following through with that action. That example. Okay. Dude, that's a great description, man. That is great. That is a great description. A Fed example of this? Okay. Um, so back during COVID, there was something called special purpose vehicles that were set up. So now the Federal Reserve had an unusual and exigent circumstances to work with. This was able to then use Federal Reserve 13.3, whatever, this law, whatever. It's only available to them in unusual and exigent circumstances. So COVID, unusual and exigent, right? So now they get to deploy some tools that they never got to use before, right? Well, they got to use them in the past, but they don't get to traditionally use those in the sense of like daily practices. They have to have an unusual and exigent circumstance. So COVID presents the unusual and exigent circumstance. They get this 13.3 that they get to deploy. Part of this is setting up backstops for every corner of the financial market. Okay. Now, part of this backstopping of the entire financial market was the corporate debt lending facility. This is my favorite one because this works so well for the Fed. And I don't have my computer out here, but I actually have where the Federal Reserve was talking about this exact moment where they set up this, where they were going to set up this special purpose vehicle, the corporate debt lending facility, fund it with hundreds of billions of dollars. Then they put out the announcement that they were going to be buying corporate debt, right? This is all like, this is coming from the Federal Reserve. They make this announcement. We have these lending facilities. One of them is the corporate debt lending facility, right? They have all these other ones. Everybody's talking about all these lending facilities. One of them focusing in on this corporate debt lending facility. They fund it with hundreds of billions of dollars and then put out the announcement that they were going to be doing this. Corporations were able to fund themselves before that facility was even set up. People began to front run the Federal Reserve, believing that if they bought into the corporate debt, they would be able to have a buyer at the Fed. So, like, they didn't have to worry about somebody to sell the corporate debt to. They had the Federal Reserve saying, we got a corporate debt lending facility in which we were going to be buying corporate debt. This right there started driving the market into corporate debt before the Federal Reserve even set the facility up. The corporations were able to get a lot of the funding that they needed. So this is one of the credible threats. Now, they would have gone through and bought they would have gone through and bought the corporate debt, but they didn't need to. Just simply setting up the facility and making the announcement that they were going to do it was enough. And people started moving into the market. Much like that explanation, right? A credible threat is a statement or an intent to a specific action if certain conditions are met, right? They were going to go through this specific action of buying into this corporate debt, right? Where the threatening party is committed to following through with that action, right? And that was exactly what they were planning on doing. They didn't need to. Once they got the facility up and running, all the corporations got all the funding they needed because these people were like, holy crap, the Federal Reserve is buying corporate debt. And then they jumped into it, much like they do with quantitative easing. That also gets people to run into U.S. Treasuries knowing that there is going to be a buyer, the Federal Reserve. So all of a sudden, people are very confident in buying into this stuff, knowing that the prices are probably going to rise and the yields fall. This is very much speculation that's happening there, and it totally worked. All right. Due to the language barrier, she came out of the doggy bag. Whatever. Okay. They're playing a game of poker. Well, no, not really, because it's the credible threat, meaning that they will go through with it. It's not just like poker is like bluffing, right? Like, I don't think there's bluffing happening. I think they will go through with all the threats that they talk about. The thing is like, because they're credible enough, right? Like they're reality based, it won't happen because the actions that people will take will then put them in a position in which they won't have to take the action. All right. Let's see. Here's a member to the channel. Seeing countless tweets on how China is going to keep dumping U.S. treasuries in mass as a tariff response, not realizing that that crushes Chinese economy themselves more than it affects the U.S. market. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, I don't think people realize that when, you hear people say that, like, oh, China's going to dump out of all their U.S. treasuries. The moment that they start dumping out of it, what ends up happening is that the prices fall and the yields rise, and it's like setting their asset on fire. It's like literally like, destroying their own asset. Like, why would you do that? It was just like, here, let me just like, make this worthless and I'll just dump it out there because I'm just mad at the United States. Like, it doesn't work like that. The reason why they are dumping U.S. treasuries is to get dollars. The fastest way to get dollars is to sell treasuries. By selling treasuries and getting dollars, now they can pay their dollar-denominated debt. Because if you have issues with getting dollars because your trade is imbalanced with tariffs or threats of tariffs or craziness that's happening inside of that, your debts are still coming due, right? It's like your debts still come due even though you don't have a job. Same thing, right? If you're not selling stuff, then you don't have a job, you don't have dollars coming in. How do you get the dollars? You sell dollar denominated assets. What's the number one dollar denominated asset that is liquid? US Treasuries. To me, this makes total sense why they would get out of Treasuries. Not because they hate the United States, it's because they got dollar denominated debts that they have to take care of. And if they don't have the dollars coming in, where are you going to get the dollars? All right. And I love when people argue, they're like, well, they'll just pay in another currency. Those people don't want to be paid in another currency. They don't want to be paid in another currency. They want to be paid in dollars because their debts are due in dollars. And that's the problem that everybody faces. All debts are eventually due in dollars. The little tiny bit that is done in a foreign currency is like so insignificant to the amount of dollar denominated debt out there that it's like non-existent. It might as well not even be there, or discussed. It's like, I mean, it's this little thing that people talk about. And they're like, look at this big deal right here. And I'm like, oh God, maybe later, when it's a much bigger deal, because right now it's insignificant. All right. What if you planned on retiring now? Well, and I would hope that my economy would be in a good position for that. Code for bath salts, and you need the vax. Trump posted that there's no inflation. Doesn't that show that he's not working with the Fed to raise the inflation expectation? Do you believe him? I mean, Trump said that there's no inflation. Didn't Biden say there was no inflation? I mean, like, who are you going to believe, man? I don't know. I didn't hear Biden say that. I just heard other people talking about that because I didn't listen to Biden. I didn't listen to a single word he said. I felt so good. 4 years, didn't listen to anything. How many people could say that? All right. Nobody. I'm the only one. All right. Again, the only one who's doing something out here. No, I'm just kidding, guys. No, but I didn't listen to anything Biden said. I didn't find anything that he was doing important enough for me to internalize any of it, right? Because all the stuff that I saw that he was doing was not going to make any difference to my view of what was happening with monetary policy and everything else. And I stuck to my guns, and I'm still accurate, right? I still feel like I'm accurate, considering that I haven't changed anything about the way I'm seeing it. It's like it's still going down with the same strategy that I had been talking about for years. It spans administrations. Like, an administration doesn't change my view, not of monetary policy. It changes my view of fiscal policy. It changes my view of a lot of other stuff that's happening out there, but it doesn't change my view of monetary policy. And so, to me, like, the president, whoever it happens to be at the time, has very little impact when it comes to the decision making of monetary policy. Very little. And I know a lot of people will disagree with that. I don't care. Like, you can disagree with it all you want. I've been studying the Federal Reserve through many administrations, and, like, to be honest with you, like, the president makes very little difference. Very little. In fact, none. Yeah. If you want to know how it makes a difference, right now, regardless of Trump saying that there's no inflation, even if he said that, I don't know if he said that, but even if he did, Nobody believes that, right? Nobody believes that there's no inflation. Everybody believes that there's inflation. And when you have a situation back at the end of his first administration where the Federal Reserve just got done printing an ungodly amount of money, and he's screaming that the Federal Reserve should be taking interest rates into negative territory and that there's no inflation and the Fed should be printing money. Like, I listen to these things and I'm like, does he really honestly believe that? Like, here's a guy who is outwardly saying we want to make America great again, and the individual who hears this says, okay, I have this deep emotional feeling that says, yes, I want my life as an American to be great again. Right? And then he goes and uses words that directly goes against that of what it would be to have an average citizen move their life into being great again. Like, he literally uses words that contradict that. So let me give you an example, right? Because at the end of this 2000, or at, towards the end of his first administration, going into 2019, 2018, going into 2019, he was talking about how the Federal Reserve was doing wrong. They were playing political, that they should be taking interest rates into negative territory. Germany had it right by having interest rates into negative territory, and the Federal Reserve should be printing money. Okay? And he then says, the rich people in the room know what I'm talking about. Now, I take that into consideration. I'm like, you do realize what you are saying by taking interest rates into negative territory and doing the money printing and all the stuff that you're talking about. The rich people know what you're talking about. They would be very excited because what that's going to do is create inequality in a massive proportion. All right? Because anytime you ever bring in new money, you're going to have separation between the rich and the poor. And if you have low interest rates or even negative interest rates, you are going to be creating a lot of money, a lot of new money. So the more new money that comes in, the rich people get richer, and the harder it is on the average everyday person. You wonder why your daily job isn't enough to buy the house and cars and go on vacation and have all the stuff like it did back in the 60s and 70s, even into the 80s, really, when you think about it. The reason why it doesn't work like that anymore is because of the massive amounts of new money that has poured into the system. When you have new money that comes into the system, you will separate the rich from the poor every single time. Cantillon describes it very well in a detailed chapters 6, 7, and 8, Increase and Decrease of Money to the State, in part 2 of his essay. It's a very good section of it. Right? And so I don't want to badmouth Trump or anything like that. Like, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to say he's a good or bad guy or Biden's a good or bad guy or anything like that, because I don't really give him that sort of meaning anymore. I just know that there is consequences for this action. I know that if you do not bring new money into the system, pain and suffering amongst everybody will be felt in mass proportion. Bringing in new money in abundance is going to be painful for the inequality, but it will, by far, be the most comforting feeling for the majority of the people, even though they are being separated, even though their jobs are not going to be enough, even though it's going to seem harder and harder every day. Having inequality from the abundance of new money coming in, creating the luxurious experience that we have here in the United States. Think about it. The homeless here have cell phones and drink beer. There's people in this world who really suffer in poverty, who really suffer. America is not a place where people suffer. It feels like we suffer because it's not fair, but life isn't fair. We have an abundance of money here that separates the rich from the poor, that creates a luxurious experience that is unlike anything else in the world. And if we do not pursue that, it'll be painful misery for everybody. I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like either way. But it ain't for me to like. Right? It isn't for me to do that. I don't give it meaning whether I should like it or not. All I know is that I see it happening, and now I have to position myself for it, and so do you. Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.